This video concerns question 4 of the AQA English Language Paper 1. Before you begin this video, you will need to download yourself a copy of the Jamaica in-source, which can be accessed via the AQA website. If you follow this link, it should take you through to this page, and when you're on this page, you will need to select the Paper 1 specimen question paper. It should just download automatically for you, and then you'll be able to view the source and also question 4. So question 4 is considerably bigger than any of the other questions that you've tackled on the paper so far. It's worth 20 marks this time, and therefore you'll spend about 20 minutes. So question 4 will present you with an opinion or a statement made by a fellow student about the source that you've been studying through the paper. You need to evaluate that statement. In terms of evaluation, that basically means how far do you agree with the statement and how far do you disagree with the statement. Now, the general plan with question 4 is that you are going to mostly agree with the statement. The example will have made that relatively easy for you. They will have given you options to be able to agree mostly with the student statement. However, in order to make your answer more sophisticated and also more evaluative, it would be an idea to try to challenge that statement at the end of your answer. So by the time you get to question 4, you will have obviously tackled question 1, 2 and 3. And what's important to note about question 4 is that actually it's a combination of question 2, which had a language focus, and also question 3, which has a structural focus. With question 4, anything that you have already talked about in question 2 or in question 3 that you think might be relevant for the final question on this paper, you can repeat yourself. You can bring in ideas that you may have already raised in your answers to other questions. Okay, so in order to give us a bit of context then, let's have a look at what this question actually is. As with every single question that we've looked at so far in this paper, you first need to underline the key terms and the instructions within the question. So I'm just going to ask you to pause the video in a second and have a real thorough read of what this question is asking you. Then I want you to consider what are the key bits of the question. So if you were presented with this question in the exam, which bits would you underline and which bits would you highlight as points of interest? So do just pause the video now and have a little think about that one. So hopefully you will have identified some similar areas. The first thing that we need to take notice of is the fact that it says the second half of the source from lines 18 to the end. So this question is limiting the number of lines that you can consider, and you need to go really careful to make sure that any information that you extract only comes from those lines. Anything outside of those lines won't actually be credited. Then we come to the student statement, which of course is going to be the focus of your answer for question 4. In this case, the student is saying that the writer brings the very different characters to life for the reader. It's as if you're inside the coach with them. So obviously that is going to be crucial for us. To what extent do you agree? As we discussed before, literally means, how much do you agree with it, how much do you disagree with it? Even though we've already talked about the fact that you are mostly going to agree with that right up until the end. And then also, similarly with question 3, don't ignore the use of the examiner's bullet points because they're trying to point you in the right direction. So do take notice of that information. Okay, so seeing as the question dictates that you are only allowed to look at lines 18 to the end, you are going to need to draw a box around the section of text so that you don't get tempted into looking at anything outside of that credited area. Okay, so as discussed before, you have 20 minutes on this question, but you need to think of this question almost like a mini essay, and therefore it's very advisable that you would take 5 minutes out of that 20 minutes in order to plan, leaving you with 15 left to do your actual writing. It's really important that you utilise that 5 minutes worth of planning time so that you can begin to build up ideas for some of the categories, some of the stages that are going to need to form part of your answer. So let's have a look at some of these stages then. You're going to need to begin with an introductory sentence. you are then going to need to develop approximately 4 point evidence analysed paragraphs, and then hopefully you are going to finish with a concluding paragraph that actually challenges the student's statement. So let's have a look at some of these areas in more detail then. Okay, an introductory sentence is absolutely crucial. You must begin with an evaluative comment to set the tone for the rest of your answer, to show the examiner that you know that at this stage in your exam you're supposed to be evaluating. As well as putting forward that evaluative comment, you also need to consider the question focus and bring that into this introductory sentence. So you can just pause the video now and have a look at some of the examples of these evaluative comments and how that has been paired with the question focus. So use the key at the top, so yellow writing is for the evaluative comment and the light blue writing is for how that has been combined with the question focus. So do just pause the video and take that in. Okay, so after your introductory sentence, this is where you would be moving on to create your approximately 4 point evidence analysed paragraphs. It's advisable, and you don't have to stick to this. It depends what what you're given in the exam and what you're able to pick out. Ideally though, it might be a good idea to focus on 2 language comments and then 2 structural comments. Now it's important to remember exactly what was included when we looked at the concept of language in question 2, and it includes words and phrases, language techniques and sentence forms. In terms of structure, that can encompass anything from the development of the text to shifts in ideas and perspectives, and then also cohesive and coherence devices. So you've got an awful lot that you could draw on in this question. It's kind of, as we said before, with the idea that it's language plus structure, you've got a whole host of things that actually you could use to help you evaluate the statement. In order to navigate between your points, between your point evidence explain paragraphs, you are going to need to use some discourse markers. So if you don't already have a copy of some discourse markers, you can pause the video now and study the discourse marker tube map, which is just on the screen for you. Okay, then we come to our final stage of answering this question, and that is where you need to contradict the statement. You're going to need to find a point that basically challenges what the student has said, that goes against what they've said. And this point can either be language or structure based. There's nothing to say that it has to be either. You also need to introduce this challenge with a comparative discourse marker. Okay, so let's have a look then at what some of these language points could entail. It's important always to remember the question focus, which is why you will have highlighted this when you first read the question. But in this case, with the Jamaica in-source, you're being asked to say whether the Jamaica in-source brings the characters to life and whether the writer has made us feel that actually we are inside the coach with the passengers. So in terms of language points, let's just have a quick reminder of some of the different components that build up words and phrases, language techniques, and also sentence forms. So obviously there's an awful lot there. You may only find some of them in an extract, but there's no telling what you're going to be able to find and what's going to be presented to you. So it's always advisable to go into your exam fully armed with as many different opportunities as you possibly can. So do make sure that you learn this content. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is to pause the video and to consider some language points within lines 18 to the end of the extract that back up the fact that the writer does in fact bring the characters to life, and that also she makes us feel that we're inside the coach with the character. So do pause the video now and have a look at the extract and see if you can find any examples of your own language points. Okay, so hopefully you just paused the video and had a little look at, tried to figure some things out for yourself. This is not an exhaustive list. There were multiple different points that you could have picked up on, but just to give you an example and an idea of some of the things that you could talk about, I've just listed 3 possible options. Taking the advice that the examiner gave you in those 3 bullet points in the question, which was write about your own impressions of the characters, evaluate how the writers created these impressions, and support your opinions with quotations from the text, I've tried to focus on the individual characters. So if we look at our first point, I focused on the old man, and I said that he is brought to life by the fact that we're given the impression that he's quite abrupt and rude and quite demanding. You will then need to back up that point with actual language analysis. So here I've chosen to use the use of verbs of thrust, shouted and cursed, which you could go further than just the use of verbs to say that actually that creates a semantic field of violence or forcefulness, which helps us to understand what sort of personality the old man has got. Alternatively, you could have talked about the fact that we definitely get the sense that the jovial woman's brought to life by the fact that she's created to be this lively, vivacious and quite confident character. You may have noticed with the paragraph describing the jovial woman that actually it is one very long multi-clause sentence all the way from line 31 to 36. So I kind of thought that maybe that was creating an intensity, as if the woman's slightly overbearing with her comical, larger-than-life character, and that's actually been mirrored in the lengthy, busy, ever-flowing sentence. Also, you could have thought about the way that Mary Yellen is introduced to us and the way that she's been brought to life to be a sort of pensive, quiet and isolated character. I picked up on the prepositional phrase, which would count as words and phrases really, with the quote opposite corner, which shows that she's actually separate from the liveliness and the anger of the old man and the liveliness of the old woman. She's sort of separate from the rest of the passengers within the carriage, and that sort of creates the impression that she's this introverted and maybe quite lonely person. Okay, so again, not an exhaustive list. You may have come up with many other different reasons, but that's just an example of the sorts of things that we'd be after with this language analysis. Okay, so let's think now then about these structural points. Again, keeping the question focus in mind, you are thinking about, right, how has the writer brought the characters to life with structure, and how have we been made to feel that we're inside the coach with them, again in terms of structure. So let's just have a little reminder then of what the different components of structure could entail and what sorts of things you could be on the lookout for. First we've got development of the whole text, also paragraph level, and then sentence level with coherence and cohesion. So what I'd like you to do now is again pause the video and explore lines 18 to the end and see if there are any structural points that you notice that help to support the student's statement. As I said before, anything that you may have already covered or may have picked up on in question 3 when you were studying just structure, it's absolutely fine to repeat that and use that again as long as it's in line with the question and it's helping you to answer it. So do pause the video now and try to find some different structural answers for yourself. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video and were able to find some points of interest. Again, not an exhaustive list, just some different things that sprung to my mind when I read it. In terms of development of the whole text, I identified the fact that we got this shift in mood, which actually I thought reflected the personalities of the people that the paragraph was describing. So, for instance, we had a very tense mood in that first paragraph to describe the character of the old man, but then we have a change in mood where actually we have a bit more of a light-hearted tone, and that really reflects the character of the jovial woman who's red-faced and winking at people. And then finally we progress again to have this a change in mood to be a bit more reflective, to mirror how Mary Yellen is perhaps a bit more isolated. So with that, I just felt that the shift in mood was actually reflecting the individual personalities of the character. Again, in terms of shifting, we also had shifts in ideas and perspectives that you may have spotted. You may remember from question 3 that we were talking about the way that this extract kind of zooms down from a big scale to a smaller scale. And the writer shifts us from that wide pan of the countryside, where he talks to us about how gloomy it is and the path that the coach is travelling down, but then really scales it down to something a bit more intimate, where actually by the end of the extract we're on a much smaller scale, because we're now accessing Mary Yellen's hopes and feelings when she writes hoping with a desperate interest. So we get the sense now that the reader's sort of moving towards a more personal connection with Mary Yellen, which would definitely link with this idea that the characters are being brought to life for us. Finally, in terms of that second statement, the second part of the student statement, which was being made to feel like we're inside the coach with them, you might have picked up on the use of the narrative voice, so the fact that it's third person and the fact that we've got an objective narrator, which creates that sense that actually we're almost a fly on the wall. And remember, we said that the objective narrator was like a video camera and could just report on what was being seen and heard. So we get the sense that we're sort of inside the carriage with them, a fly on the wall, sort of watching what's happening, really. So that would definitely support that statement. Okay, so now it has come to the stage, after you've selected your 2 language points and your 2 structural points, you now need to think about challenging the statement. So, as we already know, the statement says that that the writing brings the characters to life, and that also makes us feel that we're inside the coach with them. I want you to pause the video now and just consider whether there is anything within lines 18 to the end of the extract where actually this isn't the case, where actually the characters aren't brought to life, or maybe that we're not always inside the coach with them. So just pause the video now and do remember that the point that you raise here can either relate to structure or language. Okay, so this is not the only answer that you could have found, but one thing that jumped out at me was actually a structural point, and that was that we're not always inside the coach with the passengers, because actually, due to a structural shift in focus, we're taken from inside the coach to outside the coach when the old man is shouting at the driver. So let's just have a read through this paragraph, because it's going to lead me on to something else that we need to discuss to make sure that you've got into your answer. So let's just read this through first. Meanwhile, despite mostly agreeing with the statement, I also think that we are not always inside the coach with the passengers due to a structural shift from inside to outside. During the old man's outburst of fury, the writer shifts the focus from inside the coach by drawing the attention back to the driver, who is outside. He thrusts his head out and shouted up to the driver. So that's an example of the way that you might write this kind of this contrasting point. Well, the paragraph that you use to disprove the student's statement. And what I want to focus you on is this section in red. So when you begin writing your answer, what you need to focus on is actually that introductory sentence where we're thinking about statements such as "it's easy to agree with the student because," or "I agree with the review to an extent." Likewise, you now need to mirror that at the end of your extract with a sentence that introduces this idea of challenge. And I'm going to come on to this again later, so I won't spend too much longer on this now, but you do need to make sure that you've actually got that comparative discourse marker to show the examiner that actually I'm about to change direction here, I'm about to challenge the statement instead of saying why I agree with it. And then also it's just really helpful to just back it up with a statement like this. But I'll show you another slide in just a minute, which has a couple more examples of sentences you could use to introduce that challenge. Okay, so now that you have collated your 2 points for language and your 2 points for structure, you are now going to begin to write your PEA paragraphs. So, similar process as we have already looked at. You're going to need to start with a topic sentence. So introduce which of the areas of either structure or language you'll be discussing. Then you're going to put forward your point, followed by some concise evidence, and then in your analysis, that is where you're really going to draw on your subject terminology of either structure or language to analyse the effect. And remember that here you really need to be able to link it back to the student's statement, because that's the focus of this whole question, isn't it? You need to think about how it's bringing the characters to life, or how it makes us feel like we're inside the coach with them, or whatever the student whatever it is that the focus of the question is. Obviously that will change depending on what question you get. So if you want to pause the video and have a look at what one of those paragraphs might look like, I think I've developed the use of the verbs and the idea of the semantic field that we were talking about before. So if you do want to have a more thorough read of that and look at how that paragraph would break down, then do pause the video just now. So as I was talking about before, here are some really useful phrases for question 4 to establish straight away that evaluative tone. So as we discussed, when you do introductory sentence, it's absolutely crucial that you start with an evaluative comment. For instance, the ones that are just listed here. When you're in the middle and you are the middle of your answer and you're in between your P paragraphs, you might look at some of these phrases here to help you explore and analyse the impact of what's been created. And then finally, before you introduce or to set up this idea that you're about to challenge the statement, maybe go for one of these statements here. So despite mostly agreeing with the student, I also think, which is the one that I used in my paragraph before. Or you could try, on the contrary, I disagree with the student to a certain extent. So do try and learn those statements, because they are immensely helpful to sort of guide you through your answer, but also to show the examiner that you've really got this evaluative approach. Okay, just to summarise then, let's have a reminder of the process. Firstly, as always, you are going to need to underline the key parts of the question so you know what you're dealing with. Then you're going to take 5 minutes to plan, and you're going to consider, hopefully, 2 language points and 2 structural points that are going to help you to to deal with the student's statement. Then you are going to begin to write your answer, but you're going to start with an evaluative comment. You are then going to move on to create your 4P paragraphs, 4 if it's possible, but whatever number you're able to achieve within that time will be fine. Making sure that actually every point evidence analysed paragraph that you make is in response to the question, and also remembering that you're using those discourse markers for clarity. Finally, to finish off your answer, you're going to make sure that you challenge that statement with a comparative phrase or a discourse marker. And that sums up question 4.